Good morning. I'm Tom Watkins, Vice President for Cox Business Virginia, and I'd like to welcome you to the Cox Business Executive Discussion Series today. Well, 2020 is coming to a close, and I want to take this moment to thank each and every one of you, our regular followers of the Executive Discussion Series, and also to welcome our new guest in the audience today. You know, we've been fortunate to partner with Inside Business on this series for over a decade. In fact, this is our 47th event. Still staggers my mind every time I think about it. But we at Cox Business, along with our partners at Inside Business, are dedicated to supporting the business community and offering perspectives that will enable you to make thoughtful decisions for the good of your business. We appreciate your support, and we're thrilled that you've joined us today. What a year it's been. The events that we've experienced have affected us in unimaginable ways. Many businesses are still struggling. Families are suffering the loss of income, and we're all missing the social contact that we've become so used to. Well, as we head into the new year, it will serve us well to examine the outlook for 2021 and then prepare ourselves and our businesses for what is yet to come. Well, this morning, we're joined by a distinguished panel from around the state to give us an expansive view of what 2021 could look like for the Commonwealth. I want to say thank you in advance to Dr. Megan Healy, Dr. Rob McNabb, John Hull, and Victor Hoskins for the investment of their time and expertise. Well, despite the hardships that we're all enduring, I hope that there were moments of hope, joy, and gratitude, and that they will linger throughout the holiday season and into next year. And there's no talking about joy and gratitude without mentioning the name of Cathy Lewis. Cathy has moderated our discussions since the inception of the Executive Discussion Series, and we cannot thank her enough for her thoughtful insights, occasional humor, and the energy that she pours into the conversation. So without further ado, here's Cathy Lewis.
Tom, thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. And I know that we have so many more people joining us from all around the Commonwealth today. And this is going to be a great conversation. My appreciation to Cox Business and to Inside Business for bringing this program together. It's a really important conversation. And I want to congratulate all 250 of you on the line today for not bursting into spontaneous applause when Tom said 2020 is almost over, because I will admit I had to sit on my hands just a little bit when he said that, because I think many of us are pretty happy that this one's coming to an end. You know, I wonder how many of you had global pandemic on your drawing board when you were thinking in the fall of 2019 about your plans for 2020. And yet here we are with this global pandemic that has changed so much for us. We have had a summer of social unrest. We have had a unique presidential election, and all of that has come together to shape the world as we move into 2021. It's not like there are not enough issues to contend with. But we're talking today about how these issues will shape particularly the business environment in the Commonwealth in 2021. We do not have a crystal ball. Let me be very clear about that. But boy, our panelists are really the next best thing, because they've been thinking a great deal about these issues. They have been talking with decision makers about them. And so I think we'll really get some tremendous insights in the course of this conversation today. And as always, we want to hear from you as well. Many of you were good enough to send in some questions in advance, which was very helpful. And we've got most of them incorporated into the conversation today. We'll also be putting poll questions to you in the course of the day. In fact, that's how we'll start in just a moment. As well, we want to let you know that if you have questions that occur to you in the course of the conversation, you can just put those in the chat and they will get to us. So we're thinking about insights, predictions, and recommendations for 2021. It is a good day to be doing this, because as you may know, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, Governor Northam will be conducting a news conference where he's expected to announce new measures to control the spread of the coronavirus. We are told he is not expected to announce a lockdown or a shutdown, but that news conference does come as the Commonwealth has seen 4,000 new cases of COVID from Tuesday to Wednesday. So that's a piece of the reason that the governor will be addressing the Commonwealth this afternoon. Many of your local media outlets are carrying those conversations. They are also on Facebook Live. The governor's office does those Facebook Live conversations, so you can log in there if you have interest in watching that directly. A number of our audience members are thinking about shutdowns in the new year. Also of note, again, we'll have a new presidential administration with a very different view of the coronavirus, and there's much interest in what our panelists are hearing about the transition and its implications for the Commonwealth in 2021. Let's start today, before we fully introduce our panelists and get into the conversation, if we might, with a poll question. Billy Garland from Tribune Publishing is with us today. He is the one who does such a great job of putting the questions we're interested in together and reflecting some of yours as well. So Billy, take it away.
Yes, ma'am. So we're going to start off with one to really get a sense of how we're all feeling. The question is simple. Do you believe 2021 will be a better year for your business than 2020? Simple yes or no question. Right now, everyone should, in just a second, start seeing that poll if you're not already, and we're actually seeing those responses come back in. Thank you so much for your engagement on that. Cathy, as we get those responses, I have to tell you, I'm choosing to be positive on this particular one. I believe it's going to be better for all of us. And maybe that's a little bit premature, but that's where I'm at. Fortunately, the audience seems to be right there with me at less than 30 seconds in, and over 75% of the people voting, 83% are saying yes, it will be better, while 17% are saying no. So there's still some of that concern out there, but it's definitely a positive response.
Well, I think the announcement of 3 vaccines and maybe more on the agenda was certainly an encouraging sign. But one of the things we've learned on these broadcasts before is that it really depends. Your answer to that may really depend on what business you're in, because some businesses will have an easier recovery in 2021 than others. Okay, so how are we doing there?
So we're going to go ahead and close it out. The percentages have stayed the same, even as we near that 100% mark.
Wow.
In terms of the response rate. Still 83% positive with 17% showing some concern.
Well, that's a great result, and boy, considering we didn't have any of this on our radar at the end of 2019, we're so glad to have Megan Healy with us today. Dr. Healy is the Chief Workforce Development Advisor to Governor Northam. She has a very, very big job these days, as so many people think about doing other things for a living, as so many people analyze whether they have the kinds of jobs that are going to come back. And Dr. Healy, I wonder, as you think about 2021, it seems like there's going to be some retraining for a lot of folks depending on what industries they work in.
Yes, thank you so much, Cathy, for that question, and thanks so much for having me this morning. Many of you out there, I miss seeing you. One of the favorite part of my jobs is to get around the Commonwealth. Interesting enough, I think one of my last visits was with Victor. We were at alarm.com celebrating apprenticeship signing, and it's an amazing concept using technology and apprenticeships. So I will say, I think 2 weeks after I saw Victor, that's when we started shutting things down, and so it's good for him to be on this panel as well as my other the other panelists. Looking positively, I love that question. Sometimes, some days in my job, I think, can it get worse, right? But I think it's going to be better. So in my particular role, I oversee anything workforce. I oversee workplace safety, discrimination on the job, as well as the Employment Commission is actually tucked under me as a secretary. And so I see all kind of aspects of this COVID-19. And in workforce specifically, I talk to people on the phone every day, that people that have filed for unemployment, and I have these conversations about their job not coming back. Specifically, what we're seeing is in retail, and we have smart economists on this call right now. In retail and restaurants, we know about 80% of the Virginians have filed for unemployment, might have some college, but most of them just have a high school diploma. We have plenty of jobs open. Many people, employers on this call, have been calling me too, saying, but we have this very large skills gap. That we saw a little bit of this before the pandemic. We had more jobs open than people looking for them, but it's a little bit different. I think that skills gap's expanded. And so really coming up with different training opportunities and really getting that message to people, you can change your career, which can change your life. And this might be the best opportunity to do that within the next year.
That is such a great point, and I had not heard that statistic about 85%. That's really interesting. Very quickly, and we know that there's much more information on the website, but we do have employers on the call this morning. We also have employees who may be entertaining a different option, and so I wonder if you could just very quickly run down some of the key programs that Commonwealth is introducing and deploying to help people make this workforce transition.
Great. During this pandemic, we have launched a couple programs. One is that we had to go to virtual services. So we have 61 career work centers, and those are kind of our standalone. Some are comprehensive with social services and Department of Age and Rehabilitation Services for work supports for people with disabilities. Our Employment Commission offices are also in these locations. We have gone to virtual services, which I think is actually increasing access point to workforce services. We launched a portal. So we try to have one door to all those services, but social services that can connect to childcare needs or SNAP benefits or our food subsidies to our Employment Commission. And so we have our new Career Works portal that we launched in June. We also are creating a new program called Network to Work. And this is really getting advocates on the ground, the community. We know about 85% of how someone gets a job is who they know. And we've looked at our communities, and sometimes they don't, I always say you can't be what you can't see. So they look at their neighbors, and a lot of them might be in lower income areas. It could be a CNA or a construction worker. They don't know of the plethora of jobs out there that they can do. So we're really connecting with community. If it's a social worker, if it's a church pastor, it could be that neighbor in the neighborhood who knows everything about everyone. And we're trying to get them to recruit people off the sidelines to get into these jobs, and training might be. And lastly, the Governor Northam has put $30 million to our REV program. This is called Reemploying Virginia. Virginians. It has been extremely successful, almost too successful. We're using CARES funds that do currently expire at the end of December, and we've had 32,000 Virginians sign up for advising at the community college system. And these Virginians that have to be unemployed or underemployed, so they could have had a full-time job, but now they're working a job less than $15 an hour. And we picked 5 workforce pathways: healthcare, technology, skilled trades, which could be advanced manufacturing and construction trades, early childhood education, and public safety. And so this is pretty much a free community college pathway for anyone who has been unemployed. So yeah, 32,000 people in the last 5 weeks have signed up for some advising that they can enroll this spring.
That is great news. And of course, community colleges are in every sector in the Commonwealth. And so if you're interested in those programs, you can certainly log on to the state's websites. All the community colleges have this REV program up there as well. Thank you, Dr. Healy. Billy, let's put our second poll question up. And this is a little tricky because we'll ask our participants this morning to give us their answers to this. And then in typical college mode, we'll go to our college professor to see how right they were. Okay, so there will be no grades on this, but Dr. Bob McNabb is watching carefully. So question number 2, let's see what that one is.
All right, so this is one that is going to ask you to be a little bit of a fortune teller. For this question, it's really about when does business and life start to improve? Now, I know that that question is a little bit up to the hearer in the sense of what does improved mean? But I think we can all kind of refine that down, and it really comes down to first quarter, second quarter, third, fourth, or is it 2021 and beyond? And Cathy, I have to tell you, I'm a little bit taken aback. There's a significant portion, we're up over 30% are saying, and actually now over 40% are saying 2021. We do have about 30%.
You mean 2022?
Oh,
it's, I think
I do. That should
no
have.
worries. Listen, we don't want to stay in this year any longer than we have to. So
no, and apparently I was stuck in it as we did this.
No worries.
But fortunately, the audience seems to have figured out what I was going for.
Yeah, they got it.
But yeah, we're up at 60% are saying 2022. It's dropping a little bit, and there's some people that are very hopeful for that middle of the year. But that being said, yeah, I mean, everybody's really looking. There's not a whole lot of hope for the middle of the year. It's really that 2022 and beyond.
Well, let's give it another second or so, then we'll close it out and find out who's right on this one in terms of the economic forecasts provided by economists throughout the state. One of the best, of course, Dr. Bob McNabb at Old Dominion University. So let's close that out. And where did it come out, Billy? I'm sorry, I missed that screen.
It really stayed right there. It was that 60% looking at 2022. The only other statistically significant population was looking at Q3. So not a lot of hope before we get to the middle of the summer.
All right. Well, Dr. Bob McNabb directs the Dragas Center for Economic Analysis and Policy at Old Dominion University. They published this State of the Region report for the Hampton Roads region, but Bob looks at the economics of the entire Commonwealth. Dr. McNabb, how did our audience do? Would they get credit for your course based on their answers?
Well, I would expect double-spaced, fully justified margins, 20 pages, due at 5 p.m. But in all seriousness, if we look at the data, and I know there's a lot of initial good news about vaccines, especially that Pfizer's vaccine looks to be approved today. Moderna is probably by the end of the year. AstraZeneca's is going to be tailing a little bit behind that. We have to realize that supply chains and vaccine resistance are the issue, that it's going to just take a lot of time to get vaccines from manufacturers into people's arms, and it's 2 doses. So that means people have to come back. And then you already see the rise of the disinformation campaign online about vaccines and microchips and so forth. So if you put that together, and you listen to the epidemiologists and the White House Coronavirus Task Force, they're saying that we don't hit an inflection point until late spring. So if you put this all together, we'll start to see subsets of the population receiving inoculations in Q1 and Q2, healthcare workers, elderly, first responders, But until it reaches out into the broad segment of the population, we're not really going to see much in terms of an inflection in terms of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths. And unfortunately, from an economic perspective, from a behavioral perspective, people are adjusting their risk downward with the arrival of vaccine news. They're treating the vaccine as if, okay, things are going to get better in January, when really we're probably going to have to keep masking and social distancing on board through at least May, if not through the summer. And I know people don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. I would rather, toss it aside and go back to work full time. I'm sure none of us want to be at home on a Zoom meeting anymore. But in reality, what we'll see is Q4 is going to be slower than Q3 this year. Q1 is probably going to look awfully dismal from my perspective. You saw initial unemployment claims come up this morning. They increased to approximately 14,000 in Virginia from the Department of Labor data. As I've been saying for months, and we've talked about, public health and economic health are intertwined. If you don't control the virus and take it seriously, you should not be surprised that economic activity lags behind. So couple that with the uncertainty in the aftermath of the presidential election and the transition uncertainty that creates for a new administration. This creates uncertainty for businesses in terms of planning. And then the big question is, how do businesses handle the ethics of the vaccine? Do you require your employees to get it? What about your customers? If you're in the retail, restaurant, hotel industry, do you say, okay, before you stay at my hotel, where's your vaccine certificate? How do you validate that? Does that create a black market for vaccine certificate for those who are vaccine resistant? These are all questions we need to be thinking about now, on top of a public education campaign that we're not even doing nationally for acceptance of the virus. So put that all together, really, we're not going to look normal until 2022, probably not a full recovery from the fractures in the labor market in 2023 and beyond. So
Wow.
we will see a recovery in GDP by the end of 2021. But when you talk about the permanently unemployed, which are increasingly a higher and higher percentage of the unemployed, we've seen this from the Great Recession. Those people take a much longer time to come back into the labor force and gainfully employed than people who are temporarily furloughed.
You know what I thought was interesting, and thank you for that, Dr. McNabb. What I thought was interesting about that polling is we asked a very similar question last quarter. And if I remember correctly, most people were saying they really thought we would start to, many people thought by fall of next year, we're gonna start, and very few thought we would be going into 2022 with this. So it's very interesting to look at how those attitudes have adjusted since then. We're very glad to have Victor Hoskins with us today. He's the president and CEO of the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. Victor Hoskins, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. One of the questions that's come from our listeners, and I want to get you to comment on your sense of the economic outlook, certainly, but one of the questions that's come in from our listeners is a lot of curiosity around startup funding for entrepreneurial ventures. And we know, because I think it was last time or the time before we talked, that startup funding, sort of angel investor funding, it was tougher to get, quite frankly, and when this first came on the scene. What do you think is the outlook for startup capital for new ventures, understanding the impact of COVID right now?
Well, the impact of COVID is one of those things that we really can't predict. I was on a Zoom call with Dr. David Rubenstein the other day, and he commented that if he had spoken to this group, I was on with a bunch of other people, hundreds of people, obviously, and he said that if I had spoken to you 3 months ago, everything that I'm about to tell you would have been wrong. And he said, by the way, 3 months from now, it might be wrong. So, this might be wrong, but this is the reality that we have right now. This is something that, Dr. Healy and Dr. McNabb know. The venture capital is one of the things that is it's always been a little weak in our region. It's grown up very strong in Silicon Valley, very strong in the Boston SMSA for obvious reasons. It's done okay, pretty well in Austin, Texas, but we don't have the ecosystem that really supports the angel investing on a level of Silicon Valley. There's a reason why, by the way. Those companies that do these IPOs, they create decamillionaire, 100-millionaires, and billionaires. And what happens with them is they stay in the community and they start doing things like investing in other companies. I think the greatest example in our region is Ted Leonsis and Steve Case. Both of them AOL. Accumulate billions in assets, and then they go out and they seed companies. Mark Ein just was on Bloomberg the other day talking about SPAC. Mark Ein owns the tennis team, the Castles in DC. He also owns the online gaming team in a group called Venture House. But these are the wealthy people that are really seeding the opportunity for angel and round A investing. And you really have to distinguish which level you're talking about, because great ideas get money. You just need to know that. If it's a great idea, it gets money. But the fact is, the volume of that will be impacted by this market. People are chasing returns, so I don't think it's going to be less. As a matter of fact, I think it may be more. And the reason why is that people are chasing returns right now. You can't get returns in the T-bill market. You can't get returns in a lot of the traditional places where you could get some flow of capital. And as a result, people are moving to places where they can find deals. There's more money chasing deals right now than ever before in probably the history of the world. And it's partially because all of these institutions, the quantitative easing patterns, the lowering of the interest rates around the world, the negative interest rates in many countries, believe it or not, that actually affects our capital market too. So I think in the long run, we're probably going to do very well, partially because we're becoming more commercial than government. We've been trending that way for the last decade and a half. And I think that this is going to accelerate that. So I think, if you ask me, how is it going to be, next year, probably about the same, following year, a little better. So I think that we're trending toward better. It's just not going to be dramatic, I don't think, in either direction.
We live in hope, as they say. John Hull directs market intelligence for the Roanoke Regional Partnership. John, thank you for being here today. How are things going in Southwest Virginia? What's happening there?
Well, we continue to see recovery. For instance, in the Roanoke market, a good number of jobs have been regained from the spring when there was shutdowns and so forth, which impacted the economy. We still have a good distance to go. In our market, we lost around 14,000 jobs, and we've regained around 8,000. So that puts us down about 5,000 or 6,000 jobs, and that's quite a number to regain. It's, as Dr. Healy and Dr. McNabb have pointed out, there's a good number of jobs that have been destroyed, in the economy. It's going to take some time for that to work itself through, for that recovery to really fully root for some of those folks, and it's really contingent on economic development to work with our workforce partners and our training partners to communicate the opportunity to those workers who really need to seek out some training opportunities.
We have lots of questions from our guests today, from our audience today, around the impact of the vaccine and sort of various permutations of that question. They include, what will be the impact of the vaccine? They include, how are you advising folks to return people to work, and how are you advising them around this vaccine? So we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But Billy, this might be a good time to put one of our questions up, that last one, number 7, about will you be taking the COVID vaccine? Dr. McNabb talked about economic recovery and conquering the virus sort of being very entwined there. So if you've got that one handy, maybe we could put that one up and see what people think.
Yes, ma'am. That poll is live. And yeah, so look, with this question, we also left the opportunity to say you're unsure, because there is, to Dr. McNabb's point, there's a lot of information out there that unfortunately is causing some uncertainty. Now, I will tell you though, the vast, we're at about 62% are saying yes, unequivocally, I will take that vaccine. Only 13% are saying no, with about a quarter of our attendees, with 25% specifically, in saying they're not sure yet. We've got about 64% of the audience, so we'll give it just another couple of minutes to get some responses. But definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's a great point. So we'll give it another couple seconds, and then you can let us know what the final final verdict is there. But I'm really curious, and this is a question that's come through time and time again on the call, is what advice you all, each of our panelists, has for people thinking about integrating employees back into the workplace. Before we got on this call this morning, some of us were saying that in various companies with whom we work and relationships and what have you, a number of them are not planning on bringing people back to the workforce, or to the workplace, I should say, until July at the earliest. So some companies have kind of already made these decisions, but they still have to think about how they're going to integrate employees once they have that circumstance available. All right, Billy, what's the result for us?
Yeah, so it's stayed pretty much the same, 60% yes, 15% no, and still about 25% saying they're just unsure at this time whether they'll take that.
Yeah, I wish we had the capability to understand, because I was thinking it's interesting to know what information people would need to either feel to make a decision one way or the other. I want to go around the room, the virtual room, if we may. And John, let's start with you. Are you hearing from people in the Valley who have questions about how to bring people back to work? What's your sense of how they're thinking about that question? I'm talking about the physical locations. Everybody's still at work, or many people are.
Well, it's a mix, and there are certainly office employers who are planning to bring folks back, delaying that return to the office. There's other sectors that have never, obviously stopped going to work. It's very sector dependent. Everyone's looking for ways to increase the safety for their employees, and whether they be remote or in person. I suspect that it is highly dependent on those who remain remote. It's going to be highly dependent on the vaccine timeframe, and they'll be waiting to see the outcome of the distribution and timeframe there.
Dr. Healy, I know you've probably been engaged in some of those conversations. While your specific focus is workforce, I wonder how you would think about advising folks to think about returning to the workplace, particularly in view of that survey, which is by no means scientific, but interesting, that about 60% or so of people say they'd take the vaccine, but still 20-some% are unsure about it.
Thank you for that question. So yes, I work closely with Virginia Department of Health. I do get updates regularly on vaccinations. As I sit on Governor Northam's cabinet, I am not overseeing this. So this is what I'm working on. I've heard out in the field. So it's very promising, the vaccine. I think it's great work from these pharmaceutical companies, and I think it gives us hope within the next year that we've been looking for this past year. I think it's very promising. What we are working through the different levels. So the federal government sets guidelines on who gets vaccinated first. So we are following those guidelines. Again, the governor's come out and said our healthcare workers, our frontline, will get the vaccines, as well as a long-term care. Because if you've looked at our numbers, you look at our deaths in Virginia, it's been extremely high in our long-term care facilities. And I sit on that leadership team because we have staffing issues at long-term care. So I'm well engaged with some of that work. The second part is essential workers, right? We are currently defining what essential worker is. We've gotten lots of requests from teachers, from construction workers, from grocery store workers that they want to be first in line for the vaccine. We are not there yet of when we prioritize, right? Because we're still looking at, we have that first group that we have to vaccinate first, and then we move to essential workers. So I know there's a lot of businesses calling me about that as well. And then really encouraging any business right now, if there's possibility of telework. Our numbers have skyrocketed lately. I think it's going to get worse probably in January, that we were talking about. If anyone can telework, we really try to promote that as well. But we're really looking at those essential workers who needs to be at work on that front line with the general public to be vaccinated, and then we'll be pushing out campaigns to help support that. But I think it's really promising. We'll have better information when we know more people are vaccinated to know when everyone is safe to really go back to work.
Yeah, it's a great point. Victor Hoskins, one of the interesting things we discovered, and I guess it's something we hadn't really thought about prior to COVID-19, is we had this stunning and very troublesome reality that much of our PPE, is manufactured offshore. So when it came down to it and we needed supplies, we couldn't domestically source that. There have been many who suggested that that may be a growth opportunity for the Commonwealth as an industry. I wonder what you're hearing about that and what you think about reshoring some of those initiatives.
So I believe that that is actually a great opportunity, particularly for the areas that have land at prices in a range where manufacturing is manufactured, or even warehouse and distribution, or light assembly. Those three things are really functions that can work with the land value. When you get closer to Northern Virginia, for example, or even parts of Richmond, that's not a practical move. But we have spoken to, and I'm talking to some companies right now that are talking about manufacturing PPP, and I'm actually sending them downstate because there's really no sites large enough or at the right price to allow that. But I think it is a really great opportunity for the rural areas, for the ex-urban areas that are really outside of Prince William County, outside of Loudoun County. North of Richmond, actually southwest, Roanoke area, Danville. I think it's a great opportunity for those areas, particularly if they have ready sites, and the sites are in a range of 10 to 20 acres. I think that it is a huge opportunity. For Northern Virginia, not so much. We maybe can get their corporate headquarters, perhaps, maybe a couple of hundred employees, but that's good. We take it. And actually, that's what I'm talking to this company about them locating manufacturing downstate, and then locating their corporate headquarters. Whoever would get this project would get 1,000 jobs, and I'd get 100. But you know what? It's all Virginia. We all win.
It's all good,
in the long
right?
run, that's
It's
how you
all
build an
good.
economy.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Victor, I'm so glad you raised that because, it is true that there are implications and impacts that are positive even beyond the area that gets that particular opportunity. Bob McNabb, we come back to this idea of ready sites, and you and I've talked about that a lot over the years and how important that is. But one of the questions that we've had from the audience today has to do with the fact that in the course of this thing, as you know, some regions of the state were shut down at different times. I say shut down is too strong a word. They had different sets of criteria than other states. So, for example, since you and I were in the part of the class that had misbehaved, Hampton Roads did not get into phase 3 as quickly as the rest of the state, right? We were held back a couple of weeks on that. The question has to do with whether we noticed anything economically. Was there any impact of that some regions of the state, had less restrictions than others for a period of time, or is it too soon to know whether there would be an impact of that?
Well, let me kind of split my response into two parts, and the first part is about the vaccine, and you asked the question of will you take the vaccine, and then how do you return to work? And I think my largest piece of advice on the vaccine for employers and their employees is turn off social media. Talk to your physician and don't listen to Twitter, YouTube, etc. Because at the end of the day, if you are using a phone, if you're driving a car, if you've taken chemotherapy or any type of drug, and then you turn around and say, I don't trust a vaccine, you have a little cognitive dissonance there you have to deal with, right? And you're basically saying, I'm willing to take all the acceptance of this technology, but this thing I'm arguing against because I've heard different things. So really, you have to be aware that there's a lot of disinformation out there. Your employees are going to encounter a significant amount of disinformation. That's going to be a management and leadership challenge that you're going to have to deal with in 2021, because you're going to want to bring your employees back to work. And I fully expect, I think we're going to see that there's going to be, for federal and military employees that don't have severe health conditions, there's going to be a mandate to have the vaccine. That K through 12 education, there's going to be strong incentives by the federal government for like the MMR vaccine to be vaccinated. And there's not going to be religious ethical exemptions on that. So there's going to be a lot of push for vaccinations. If you want to internationally travel, you're going to have a vaccination and so forth and so on. With regards,
go ahead.
No, if back to your question about the heterogeneous policy responses, one of the things that I've advocated for a long time is that blanket responses across the state, across the nation don't make sense, but you got to have a common standard. In other words, our problem right now is that what California considers a severe situation is different than Texas is, and then North Dakota is, well, and South Dakota are just, well, they're on a different planet. And so what you end up with a lot of confusion, because New York says, yes, you could have an enclosed space, but it's outdoors, so that's outdoor dining. And then Virginia says, no, you got to have one wall open. And then Texas says, oh, everybody can dine anywhere they want. And so the lack of common standards across the states and common thresholds to trigger responses is what creates a lot of confusion.
It's really interesting.
And so what we should have is graduated policies. And so we should move out restrictions based upon infection rates. Unfortunately, right now, because of Thanksgiving and the spikes we're seeing from Thanksgiving, and probably we'll see on top of that from Christmas, is that we're going to have to roll back a lot of activity. We're going to probably see restrictions for restaurants, gyms, and et cetera, and churches, just because at some point in time, if you increase the load on the hospital system, you may be able to manage the COVID patients, but then if somebody has a heart attack or a stroke or needs emergency surgery, those resources are not available. So you increase not only COVID mortality, you increase overall mortality. And that's
so
what
all that makes the difference, yeah. And I should note that when we asked the question about, are you going to take the vaccine, and we had, I think 20-some% said they were unsure. And I asked, I think it'd be interesting to know what's behind that. We had a couple of people say once they have a better sense of the long-term effect of the vaccine, that could be influential in helping them make a clear decision on that. So I thought that was interesting. One of the things I wonder about, and I want to make sure that we are able to go around on this question, has to do with getting employees back to work and what you think that looks like. And again, when I say back to work, I know many people are at work, but back to work in a place where you don't have children and dogs in the background. And we know more about everybody's personal life right now than we ever did before. And there's upsides and downsides to that, I suppose. But Billy, let's go ahead to that question number 4, if we might, and just get a sense of where people are on this question.
Sure. Yeah, this question asks you again to kind of project the future a little bit and think about your workplace environment, whether you control everything about your environment or you just kind of know what leadership is doing. The question is simply, how do you envision your workplace environment going forward? Is it a fully in-person? Is it fully remote? Or is it somewhere in the middle with kind of a hybrid setup? And it seems like the majority of the audience is saying a hybrid. We've got 75% are saying hybrid at about 50% of the responses coming in at this point, with 21% saying fully remote, only 6 saying fully in person.
Wow, that's really interesting. Only 6 fully in person. And again, some of the answer to that question could depend on the kind of business you undertake. But these are very, it's clear that people thought a lot about this, and it's also clear that people's attitudes, to some extent, have changed the further where we are now, where we are more deeply entrenched in this scenario moving forward, noting that this situation will probably be worse in January. That's a great point. All right, Billy, where are we ending up on this one?
We're ending up basically right where we were, and thank you again to the audience for your engagement on this. We did get the fully in person up to 9%, which is an improvement versus where we were a few seconds ago. Still 73% expecting some sort of a hybrid setup, with about just under 20% saying fully remote.
So that's really interesting, and I want to make sure that we I want to make sure that we ask each of our panelists this question. If we have so many people opting for or believing that a hybrid mode will work for them, it sort of invites us to consider we are in a hybrid mode because we discovered very quickly that we could do that. Most of us who had Zoom very rarely in our lives, all of a sudden had to be experts by the end of the week. And the question is, how many of these activities that we have embarked on during the pandemic do you think will still be with us when it's over, when we have moved on from this? John Hull, could we start with you?
Sure. I think businesses have discovered a certain level of efficiency through remote meeting, remote operation, use of Zoom and other tools that really was available but has been accelerated and discovered. And I expect those habits. Some of those will stick with us long term. Even after a return to the office, there may be more meetings held remotely. It's certainly more efficient without the travel time involved and so forth. So I expect some of those habits to stick long term.
Your audio.
I knew it would happen one time during this conference, and that was brilliant what I just said that you all didn't get to hear. So let me see. It's tough to duplicate the magic, but there it is. Bob McNabb, as you think about this question, what initiatives from this COVID environment, work from home, where we've all discovered this, do you think will persist once the pandemic is over?
Well, I think John had a very apt comment in that, employers are going to see value in meeting like this, and that if you're here in Hampton Roads and you need to have a conversation with somebody in Lynchburg or Blacksburg or Charlottesville, you don't need to hop in a car and do that. Now, there's in-person meetings. There's sometimes that social networking that needs to take place, but if it's a 30-minute meeting, you don't have to drive 6 hours to do it. But also, I think that it provides a real incentive for, as Victor was talking, to economic development agencies outside the urban crescent, because now they have proof that work can take place outside of major metropolitan areas and that the work is efficient and effective. And that you could say, look, you can site here in a non-major metropolitan area and have your manufacturing here, have your management cluster here. Maybe your headquarters is located in Northern Virginia or Richmond, but your primary effort is concentrated here in Blacksburg or somewhere else. You don't lose anything because of the ability to work remotely. And that is a win-win for everybody, because one of the things that we talk about in the upcoming State of the Commonwealth report that's coming out this month is this growing urban-rural divide in Virginia. We're becoming more to Virginia. And we see that in the response to the pandemic in terms of employment and unemployment, and now the rise in infections in rural areas. And so if we don't think about this cogently in terms of the recovery, we could actually end up leaving large swaths of Virginia further behind than they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah, it's such a great point. Megan Healy, how about you? As you think about the things that we've done during the pandemic, are there things that you see surviving it?
Yes, I would have to agree with Dr. McNabb on economic development. This is actually could potentially be a silver lining of telework and how we better leverage technologies for workers. Economists, I've seen from 2020 that rural Virginia will not bounce back fully until 2023. I've even seen a report that said 2025. So Dr. McNabb could probably correct me on that. We also have seen where the jobs are. If it's retail and restaurant, those are a lot of the jobs in rural Virginia that might not come back. And so we are nervous about that. We want to make sure that economic recovery is top of mind after we get over this health crisis. And we really want to support our rural Virginia by economic development. So really that telework, how do we come up with jobs in rural areas that can support maybe our Northern Virginia companies. I know Victor thinks about that and is really helpful in that. One thing that we could have a whole another hour on is that we still have 500,000 Virginians without broadband. And so that is still a large issue that we also need to fix to better support this possibility of kind of onshoring work from our other Virginia companies.
Victor, I wonder, thinking about this from your perspective, you talked earlier about that idea of you could see a scenario where you'd have a company who's doing something in Northern Virginia, but the plant was somewhere else in the state. I wonder, there may be an opportunity there, or there may be an extent to which the ways that we have worked now have sort of, by default, led us into closer conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'd like to break this into parts. So the first part I would break it into is operation of the business. Like, how does it operate? And the way that businesses operate right now, particularly those, let's talk about office workers, because that's primarily what we deal with, is I believe that we were at about 10% remote workers prior to this. I believe we're going to be upwards of 20%, but not everybody's going to go remote. So let's say that we go 20% remote. At that stage, then people are starting to look at outlying parts of Virginia as an opportunity, lower housing costs, really a slower, more enjoyable quality of life, able to fish. I have talked to one of my friends the other day talking about fishing. I was like, wow, I haven't thought about that in a while. But that kind of thing. The other piece is the hybrid, where a person spends 3 days in office, 2 days away from the office. And that can accommodate child care facility needs, or needs to deal with an aging parent, because a lot of people have that. And I think that is a beautiful part of this that's coming out. And in the third, of course, are those workers, which I think is about 20% are going to be like back in the office. Now I'm talking office workers. Now let's move that aside. Now let's talk about the physical location of these companies. Like, where do they locate? Dr. McNabb made a great point, and so did Dr. Healy, about how we can really go distance now, and we can think about companies being more spread out physically. It gives you an opportunity to attract a warehouse and distribution or a manufacturer, and then have the corporate headquarters located in a central metro location. Whether that's Hampton Roads or Richmond or Northern Virginia, it doesn't matter. But just that as an example. The last piece of this that I would talk about is like the hub and spoke part, where companies will locate their corporate headquarters in a city like DC, and then go to the suburban areas for more space, and to locate a satellite office. And that's what they're calling that, the hub and spoke. Now, those two things are important: how the business operates, physical location of the business. The last piece I would talk about is the talent. The talent this is Dr. Healy's nightmare, okay? She knows that we have to re-educate so many people because of the creative destruction that has happened. It's created jobs, but it's destroyed jobs. I mean, Trumpeter made it very clear that this is going to happen, and it has happened over, since the industrial age started. So given an information age, it's even happening faster. So we have to reskill a lot. And I think that is really going to be actually a win point for the state of Virginia. The governor and the economic development officials, and Dr. Healy was among them, that put the money behind our universities to start, pushing into this innovation campus scenario. But even more importantly, what they do at community colleges and the reskilling. Dr. Healy talked earlier about alarm.com. They retrained musicians. I mean, one of these persons was like a violinist, and another was an auto mechanic, and they're coding. They're doing coding. So it's possible. It's just that you have to make the investment. And to me, if we are going to win in the future, that's going to be the big win. That is going to be the big investment. How do we reskill all of these, people who were in one industry, and now clearly those jobs aren't coming back, and get them in another industry? We know they don't have to be at the physical location if they're going to code. So take advantage of it. And broadband is right in the center of that. So I want broadband for the rural areas as much as the rural areas want broadband. Because again, as I said earlier, this is the entire economy of Virginia, not just a piece of an economy. And companies don't see borders.
Yeah, that's such a great point. We have just a very few moments left, because we are committed to wrapping up our conversation at 11 o'clock. So I want to do a little bit of a lightning round here as we wrap up. And I want to ask each of you, what is your best advice for businesses in 2021 as they adapt, survive, and grow? Okay, what is your one piece of best advice? And we will make this a lightning round. Dr. Healy, how about you? One piece of advice for 2021.
I think there's promise and hope. I know it's challenging now to even see beyond tomorrow or next week or next year, but I think there's hope. So buckle down, do the right thing, make sure workplaces are safe. We have to make sure that this health crisis is put behind us before we start working on our economic crisis. But I see extreme promise, and so I know it's a long road, but I think we're almost there.
Be hopeful. Yeah, thank you. Bob McNabb, how about you? One piece of advice for business in 2021.
I think I'm going to echo Dr. Healy, even though I'm part of the Dismos science. Avoid recency bias. We are ending 2020, which is probably one of the most traumatic years in at least all of our experience, and this puts the Great Recession to shame. So we're going to color our decision making with everything through a 2020 lens, and that may be appropriate, but we're going to have to start planning longer now. And there are advantages to take care of now. And as Victor just said, broadband is one of those. Advanced manufacturing. There are opportunities out there. While there's uncertainty, there's also opportunity. And so I think longer term, this is the time to basically say, how do we launch ourselves into innovation and entrepreneurship as the economy recovers and rebounds in late 2021 and into the remainder of the decade.
John Hull, how about you very quickly? What one piece of advice do you have?
I would say creatively look at ways to make sure your employees, but also your customers feel safe and communicate.
Great point. Yeah, that's a really great point. Victor Hoskins, how about you? One piece of advice to carry into 2021.
Yes, there's an article that just came out yesterday from UCLA's business school on a forecast, and this forecast basically said there are going to be roaring 20s coming up. So get ready for the roaring 20s. The last time we had a pandemic from 1918 to 1920, roughly 1921, there was an economic slowdown, and then there was an economic explosion. Get ready for the economic explosion. Position yourself. That's what I would say. But read that article first. It will give you a lot of insight.
That's fantastic. So, so concluding, we have look longer term, be hopeful. There's good news coming. I love the idea of the roaring 20s. That is fantastic. And in the meantime, make sure your employees and your customers are safe. John Hull, I want to thank you for joining us from Roanoke. Bob McNabb, thank you for joining us from Old Dominion. Megan Healy, thank you for joining us from the governor's office and efforts around workforce development. And Victor Hoskins, thank you for joining us from Fairfax County today. A quick reminder, again, 2 p.m. this afternoon, Governor Northam will have another news conference, and it's an important one because we do anticipate some changes coming, not lockdowns, but changes coming. So do be on the lookout for that as we head into the afternoon. If we do not get a chance to connect before the new year that is 2021, I say congratulations. You've made it this far. 2021 is right around the corner. And I do want to take a moment to thank particularly Billy, who is Billy Garland, who's been doing our questions for us today. And I also want to thank the folks at Tribune Publishing, where Billy is, and as well Cox Business for co-sponsoring this event, as they have done now for 47 sessions. So be on the lookout for another event coming your way in the first quarter of the year, and we'll get a chance to check and look over time and see how our predictions have been going. I'm Cathy Lewis, and thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time right here on the Executive Discussion Series.